This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Spring Creek Model Trains. Family owned for nearly 25 years, Spring Creek is your destination for model trains. Check out springcreekmodeltrains.com for a wide variety of offerings from today's top manufacturers and exclusive products found nowhere else. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, or at a train show near you, stop in and say wow. To see where they'll be next, visit their website at springcreekmodeltrains.com. If you're looking to bring more realism to your layout industries, look no further than TullyModels.com, the home of Southern Tier Grain Modeler Supply and Steel Mill Modeler Supply. With models to fit steam, transition, and diesel eras, Kevin Tully has you covered with all of the components you'll need to take your grain and steel mills to the next level. Check out the entire catalog at TullyModels.com. Happy holidays, everyone. We're taking the rest of the year off to spend with our families, so there'll be no shows released on December 30th and 31st. On behalf of all of us here at Around the Layout, here's wishing you and yours a happy holiday season. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. We're going to be talking about prototypical model railroading, and joining me to do that, Isaac Fabris. Isaac, welcome back.
Howdy.
Good to see you again, my friend.
Likewise.
And we've been chatting a bit about this. I know that you probably, we'll be nice here, but we talk to a lot of freelance model railroaders, and we get to hear how they've created their stories. And I still think it's very, fascinating how many of these have landed there. But I know I've got at least one friend out in Illinois who may cringe a little bit when he hears this, because you're more into, and we were battling around with this word, and whether we started with hardcore and then extreme and then some other things, but then we landed on authentic. And you really like to head towards the more authentic prototype railroading. So we're going to get a chance to talk to you about all the things that you like about doing a little bit more on the prototype side and following that path, and then learning how you get all of that information to truly stay authentic to your prototype.
Yeah, I can get behind a good railroader lies, but I'm just a lot harder than most to convince of its plausibility.
So tonight we're going to be talking about that, and looking forward to it. So Isaac, this is your third appearance on Around the Layout podcast, and we've talked a bit about it. But for those that may not remember or haven't got a chance to go back and listen to it, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're modeling?
I'll deviate a little bit from last time that I'm modeling the CNIC Heyworth Spur in 2006. But I'd like to say I'm modeling the CNIC Gilman Sub now, of which the Heyworth Spur is just a small portion of. Because when we start to get to talking about all the prototype research that I've done and my prototype interests, the Gilman Sub, the entire subdivision, is a more accurate representation of what I'm interested in, just not what I'm currently modeling.
Excellent. So in your path, it sounds like you've even become a little bit more prototypical as you're kind of like tuning in, because it was all about the Heyworth Spur. Now you're kind of like, pulling that even tighter. Is that right?
I don't think any tighter. Like I said, the Heyworth Spur is just a spur off of the Gilman Sub. I've always been interested in the Gilman Sub. I just only chose to model the Heyworth Spur in my current home because I knew that I wanted to do something achievable. And that I wasn't going to be in this house forever.
Tell us how you landed on the Heyworth Spur and the Gilman Sub.
It's pretty simple. I grew up at the epicenter of both the Heyworth Spur and the Gilman Sub in Clinton, Illinois.
Excellent. So you're kind of rebuilding some memories that you've had from the time growing up.
Yeah, I think I said in one of my last episodes, I'm replicating the era which I grew up in and saw bits and pieces of, but didn't fully get to experience.
Excellent. So kind of rebuilding that so you get to experience it.
Right.
What going back to it, I mean, when you were younger, how much of this information were you able to kind of carry forward? What are some of your better memories of the actual prototype?
I've very, very few, just bits and pieces here and there, being playing at a park near the tracks and seeing a train go by as a kid, driving by the yard, seeing a train on a trip somewhere. along the road where the tracks parallel the road, which the Gilman Sub parallels only Route 54 for basically its entire length. So in family road trips, a lot of times you'd see something out the window, but I don't have any specific memories. It's just kind of bits and pieces and snippets.
So kind of making up for lost time,
Exactly.
creating something you missed, which is really kind of a neat idea.
Yeah, a lot of people would call it a time machine, and that's an accurate representation. But I think even more so, I'm attempting a historical reenactment of it.
It kind of goes along with what we've talked about before with like calling it a simulation, right?
Sure.
And when we operate our layouts and when we do scenery or when we even do track design, you know, how much can we get, how close can we get this simulation? And that sounds like exactly where you're heading towards.
Sure. An authentic simulation. Exactly.
Yeah, there's that authentic word. Perfect.
Yep.
We found the way to mix that in there.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like authentic better than accurate because I'm more interested in the macro side of the prototype and not the micro side, and in that I don't consider myself a rivet counter. Far from it, actually. Sure, I have minimum standards for detail. Like I don't have any blue box cars anymore because they're just so chunky. But at the same time, not everything is tangent level.
I guess in my mind, I go to, and I'm thinking about this simulation concept, and I think about the things that exist for simulating, right? And then maybe even outside a railroad, and maybe my mind goes to really aircraft, right? They've got these simulators they use for training, and you know, out the windows they see trees and houses and you know whatever else is there on approach, and they can get, but not all the detail is there, but it adds to the feel of them flying the aircraft. And
Right.
I think, you know, kind of coming back to it, and maybe I've gone a little bit off the rails here, but I think that's kind of what we're trying to do too, is like, you know, emulate as much as we can without taking away from the experience of running the train, but still make sure that it's an authentic feel. Am I pulling myself back on the rails here?
Exactly. Yeah, I don't want to cross into tedium of again the differentiation between accuracy and authenticity. If I was accurate to the extent I am authentic, I might have already crossed into tedium, and the op sessions wouldn't be fun for me or visitors. But the other thing is I want it to be comprehensively authentic, and that I don't miss any of the parts of the authenticity. So paperwork is authentic, operations are authentic in the way of, I'll sound like a broken record, but the proto throttle and momentum, traffic and cars types and all that, like we've talked about in prior, and like you talked about with Matt Fricks, is all authentic. Roster is authentic, obviously. Scenery is authentic. The route is authentic. The towns, the industries, yada yada yada.
To me, it's all about telling the story, right? And we talk about this, another concept of storytelling with our layouts. And a good storyteller can tell the story when they remove all the boring parts. And I think that's where you're talking about that tedium, right? That you have this ability to tell the story of the Gilman Sub or the Heyworth Spur without all the boring parts that nobody cares about, but yes, still be able to tell an authentic story.
Exactly.
I mean, you watch movies, you know, you watch a biography, they don't tell you about the average day of a person where they just went to work and came home. They leave that part out, and instead they tell the exciting parts. And I think that's, you know, part of the storytelling aspect of us building model railroads, especially on the prototype side.
Right. I actually have a funny example for that. Just last weekend, a family friend of mine who's retired from the CNIC and worked commonly on the Gilman Sub gave me a tote of his old paperwork. And there's the usual timetables and stuff like that. And what I was really hoping for is some switch lists, and there weren't any, unfortunately. But the other big chunk of it is just like HR level stuff. There's a bunch of union paperwork, dues and stuff, a bunch of pay scales and schedules and more, again, tedium rule books, and it really reinforced and made it obvious that that's the stuff that isn't fun, right? And that's the stuff that we're omitting in the name of authenticity, not accuracy.
Yeah, good example of that. You know, it's the stuff that, you're not going to have your operators come over and sign a union contract and pay union dues.
Exactly.
There's no pay. There shouldn't be at least any money being exchanged.
Actually, that's what one of the things was an envelope for union dues. And I was like, well, that's irrelevant for me. It's cool. And I'm super grateful that he gave it to me. But a large chunk of it was stuff like that. That's just.
Now, if you were seeking donations to add onto your layout, maybe you'd pass around a union due envelope, right? But
there you go.
No, I mean, but it's a great example of really neat stuff to see, but doesn't really apply. So let's get into the crux of this. When you decided that this is what you were going to do, you're going to model the Heyworth Sub and have these few childhood memories. Where did you start to learn about the CNIC sub, and where did you start to gather that information and start sorting that out? What was going to be important and what was kind of be left on the editing room floor per se?
As a kid, I started out just kind of going wherever the wind took me. This is a cool paint scheme. I'll grab that. I kind of liked BNSF just because it was popular and I liked the scheme, but I didn't have any connection to it. And then I realized, and I'm sure I'd been told this beforehand, but it really sunk in, that a lot of my family had worked for the IC. My grandfather, who had passed before I was born, worked for the IC up until his death. I had more than a few extended family who worked for the IC. One cousin who still does, and the fact that it's the hometown railroad really sunk in. I think in late high school, sometime around high school, and I started to just be like, okay, I'll start getting CN stuff, and without really a direction besides that. And then I think I found some of the, if I recall this correctly, I'm actually kind of guessing at some of this, but I found some of the websites, the archive websites, Railroad Picture Archives, railpictures.net, and YouTube too, although there's not that much coverage of my line on YouTube. And started looking and realizing just how cool that era was for power and traffic and all the stuff now that I'm engulfed in. And just kind of slowly started realizing and slowly started researching and noticing and picking up on things that, oh, this happened in this year. Oh, this is how this worked. This is what, you know what I mean? That type of thing. And then junior year of college, I settled on an era, which was then 2008 and now 2006, for irrelevant reasons, frankly. And that was when I actually, it's like, okay, this is my line in the sand. This is what I'm modeling. I think this is a worthwhile endeavor to positively constrain myself in this manner, because my goal is not just to buy whatever shiny engine piques my fancy. My goal is to reenact or relive this era that I kind of missed out on. And everything else has just been refining that. I'm learning little traffic tidbits, like the car routing fanatics episode with Matt Fricks and all the roster nuances and these engines were retired, these engines weren't, all the variety that I get to run, and just again reinforcing that this is what I want to do.
In this process, does it seemingly make it easier, or is it more of a challenge? Because I mean, the history has been written for you, right? You don't need to make a decision like, say, a freelancer who's going to decide whether or not a GP38-2 fits within their era of their story that they're trying to tell. That story's kind of already been written for you. You don't have to make that decision. That one's been made for you. But do you find it more challenging that it has been, and you hit a level of maybe frustration that you can't include stuff, or does it just make it, kind of that kind of peaceful that you don't have to worry about those things?
I'd say it's liberating. Yeah. And especially before I picked a prototype, I had a couple layouts and layouts as a kid, right? That just kind of spaghetti bowls or had really no direction. And I identified like that was an issue, but I didn't really know what the solution was at the time. And now I do. See, I think liberating is a good word for it in my case, because my goal isn't just to run whatever I think looks cool or I don't want to make my own history either, which I think is probably, in my opinion, the best reason to freelance. Just doesn't interest me. Again, I want to recreate the time that I missed out on, right?
So talk about we talked about this idea of building authenticity, and where does that line exist for you? Okay, these are the things that absolutely has to be accurate, and these are the things that maybe die in compression. Where do you kind of draw the line, and to try to pull it as accurate as possible?
It's an ongoing question, and it also depends on the context and what you're particularly, or what I'm looking at, or what you're trying to decide. I think in general, I would go back to that macro versus micro perspective, and I take very much a macro perspective. On one hand, say I'm trying to recreate a prototype carpool for cover hoppers. No surprise, I've exhaustively explained why I love them in my prior episodes. But if there's a unique model of a covered hopper that's not quite up to, certainly not up to tangent standards, and not a poorly detailed model, but a mediocrely detailed model. To me, omitting that variety of that car type is more egregious to the prototype than keeping it because of the macro perspective, right? Omitting it because it doesn't have enough detail, that micro rivet counter level, is less prototypical for my macro perspective because I want the accurate variety and distribution of those car types. From a layout context, I am not as zealous about lack of compression as I once was, because I want to model the kind of a day in the life from an operations perspective. I want my ops to be kind of a day in the life of the Gilman Sub. So modeling just a single town, as much as I like that from a track planning perspective, and recommend that to people I track plan for me, I kind of have to model, in my case, the entire southern half from Clinton to Springfield, because that is the route that one of the daily locals took. And in order to, again, model a day in the life of that local's crew, I have to be able to model both ends, which is not the Heyworth Spur. But that's why, again, I'm adding the Gilman Sub into what I'm doing now, because that's the goal, and what I'm researching for, and what I'm going to do next.
Are you drilled down to one specific date or a few specific dates on your layout?
Season and a year, fall of 2006, early fall, if you want to get particular. Mostly for it's twofold. Obviously, the scenery is hard to deny. It's my favorite time of year, sweatshirt weather, right? And then the grain rush,
right?
And also there's also surprisingly a fertilizer rush as well, and that you're either applying fertilizer to your freshly harvested fields as cover for the winter, or fertilizer dealers are stocking up for the planting season.
Yeah, and I've seen some other layouts do that where they have pushed it to even one specific date or three specific dates. And I just, I thought about that and I said, boy, does that make it even more simple, because now you just know on those three specific dates, or for you, even just a season, this is how the railroad ran in a season. And it seemingly would allow you to drill into more detail. You don't have to worry about what they were doing spring, summer, and winter. You only have to find the information and drill in on the fall.
Right. If I had that information, it might be tempting to do it, but frankly, I don't think I would. That is to go to like a specific day or even a week, and that I like the day to day as well. It's a day, not the day in a life, right? Yeah. I love the, like, traffic is not is usually a continual thing, right? And I love the traffic routing, right? Car routing. Modeling just one day would just be back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, right? So that's why I think a season is as low as I would go. That also brings up something, reminds me of something from your last point, and that another way that I am lax in my prototype modeling is traffic types. I will bring if there's some random rare traffic type a couple years after my era or before my era, I'm not above or too opposed to bringing that into my era and running it, although it'll be ran with error accurate car types.
So the guardrails are not quite on the shoulder. There's a little bit of wiggle room.
There's wiggle room in certain aspects. There's zero wiggle room for locomotives and Ross and car types. I don't find a need to, and haven't really had a desire to yet, luckily. There is a little wiggle room in track arrangement. Sometimes I'll use a track arrangement from a little earlier than my era, or a kind of conglomeration of both. And if the track arrangement was a lot more complex 5 years before that my era, and super simplified in my era, I'll kind of meet in the middle somewhere. Clinton was kind of like that. It was formerly a huge division point, and now for the past 30 years, it's been just a local base. There's a few tracks that I've kind of added back that were present in like the early 2000s, but not 2006.
So you talked about the fall time and, being the grain rush, and then you got this inside information about how fertilizer is applied and, the reasoning for it. Where did you start to gather that information? Because to me, it seems like that's the stuff that, if you can get into that heavy, that knowledge base and be able to understand it more, it would seem to be a lot easier to start, bringing your simulation a lot more accurate, obviously.
Those two in particular are kind of just common knowledge or that I've asked close relatives who are farmers. So that's kind of just common knowledge around the house, right? Or easily Googleable. Generic stuff like that, like the grain rushes in the fall, right? That's when harvest time is.
Yeah.
But more specific stuff has come from the research, from the pictures, from friends who model adjacent interchanging railroads and stuff like that. Regrettably, I have not yet been able to find any prototype paperwork, day-to-day paperwork. It's like, sure, I have track charts and timetables, but I don't have like switch lists yet. Hopefully I'll be able to find some of those soon, but not yet.
So how are you doing it now? Is it kind of just like an educated guess kind of level to, that this is, probably what they did until you get that information? How do you kind of fill that gap, that knowledge gap, I guess?
Depends on the traffic type. But generally it's from pictures or YouTube videos, pictures especially. I was just listening to my last episode, and I had 2,000 entries in my database. I now have 3,000 entries in my database, but very few of those are actually from the Gilman Sub. The Gilman Sub crosses the Peoria Sub, both CN lines, at Mount Pulaski, Illinois, and so they interchange with each other. It's a CN interchanging with CN, but there's a local that runs each line, and they interchange with each other. And I've actually got more data from the Peoria local, the Peoria Sub local, that is delivering cars to the Gilman Sub local than I do actual data of cars on the Gilman Sub local.
Okay. But so you're basically taking and figuring out, well, they interchanged with them. Here's the cars. That's where they are. So
it's only one local. So there's only one place that they could go. But I have more cars from that than I do of the actual local in my database.
Other than talking to relatives and you've got some friends that help you out, what are some of the best resources that you've had for gaining this prototype information?
Definitely the archives, like I mentioned earlier, the Railroad Picture Archives, railroadpictures.net, YouTube if you can find them. And like I said in my last episodes, I literally just put it on 0.25, the YouTube videos on 0.25 speed. Still have to pause them, but and enter in every car number, car initial, car type. I even do color scheme, whether it has graffiti or not, whether it has FRA stripes, because that was just becoming a thing in my era. If I know it, which I rarely do, I'll put the load, the commodity, where it's going, where it's coming from. Like I said, I rarely know that, but if I do, I will put it in there. Or if I suspect it, I will put it in there. And then that's allowed me to kind of deduce patterns, find things that are off pattern, stuff that are one off or rare moves, and kind of get a really good generic idea of what traffic was like.
So you've got 3,000 entries into this sheet that you're tracking. Of the 3,000 entries, are there duplicate cars within that spotted in different places, or is it 3,000 individual cars? Talk about what you're tracking there, and then how you're using that.
It is very rarely the same car entered twice, unless it's the same car seen on multiple trips, right? Like, so this potash car gets unloaded at fertilizer dealer, then goes back to Canada to get loaded with potash and comes back. I've got a couple, or coal car, got a couple coal cars that are like that, where they were seen on multiple trips. That's the only time I repeat one. And I don't really have the opportunity to see it multiple times anyway. So that's not really an issue I've had. So yeah, there's that. And then I also, of course, put the location, the date, the train that it's on, the direction for each car. There's two ways that I use it primarily, besides just seeing if I can buy if I can buy a particular car that just came out. One, I will sort by location in line to only Gilman Sub or Gilman Sub directed cars, and then I will go generally over to the type or commodity, if I know it, columns, and kind of deduce proportions, mostly mostly in my head, with exceptions, and just say, oh, there's a lot of grain. Obviously, there's a lot of potash. There's actually a lot of lumber going to various lumber dealers. There's a lot of liquid fertilizer, scrap going to the Peoria area, and stuff like that. And then I'll find the one-off things, the low things. Oh, there's occasional enter here. There's occasional flour loads coming out of ADM or whatever. Then the second way I use it is to create a pool of cars with authentic, actually accurate in this case, scheme and type proportions. So I'll pick the two that I mainly do because they're my favorites are grain or fertilizer, right? So I'll sort through all my potash cars, and then I will look at the proportions of types and schemes within that. And then, like I said, obviously I'm not having 3,000 cars on my layout, so I can then apply those percentages to however many cars I want to own and have the correct proportions.
It sounds like a lot of work, but it sounds like a labor of love for you.
Yeah, I said in the last episode, I wouldn't do it if I didn't enjoy it, but I certainly enjoy it.
It's got me thinking, for the listener that's tuning in for this episode and thinking about, prototype railroading. Maybe they've got an idea for a prototype. Maybe they haven't, built a layout yet, or they're in that information gathering and process. These are some of the things that you could be doing without modeling, that would kind of, maybe bring you some joy. Like, fire up and find a YouTube video of your prototype running through an area, and then just, like you said, put it on slow and start writing down cars and start gathering some information.
Right. And it can be as specific or as general as you want. Just say, oh, this was a train with half grain cars and a couple tank cars and a couple flat cars. Like, that's all you really need to do. You can be as hardcore as you want it.
Yeah, but then if you got into the little bit more detail, maybe that's how you learn that detail too, right? Because I'm kind of one of those guys. I mean, I'm starting to tune it in a little bit. I mean, I've gone from the basic idea of, okay, box car, flat car, tank car, to, okay, that's an LPG car. Okay, that's obviously a high cube. That's this is a single door box car, and starting to tune it in. And I think that may be part of that education as well, to be able to sit there and, figure out what these cars are and what they're doing. And as you said, there's some amazing resources online.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if you've got a more better documented prototype than I do.
Yeah. Or if if your prototype is still running, that's even better.
Exactly. Yeah. I have a friend who's like that who can see his prototype from his office window. And I suggested, and he has started a database for himself.
I'm kind of one of those guys. I like to collect and, get lost in an Excel spreadsheet and be able to put that data in. So you've risen to this level where you're collecting a lot of data, and you've hinted on it. Tell us what if you were to look at this spreadsheet that you have, what information are you specifically collecting on the cars? What exactly are your I guess columns on your spreadsheet?
I'll read through my columns in order. I have a number column because this is a spreadsheet nuance. If you sort them numerically, or if you order them, the only way to undo that is by the undo button. You can't unsort. So you need a column in the left, usually on the far, one of the far ends, that just counts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If you want to put it back in the order that you entered it in, which is important if you want to know where it wasn't within a train,
right?
Then you can just sort that A to Z, or one to infinity, right? So that's the first one. Then train. which is train symbol, or if I don't know the symbol, I'll just generically say grain train, coal train, local, whatever. Direction, north, south, east, west. Location, line, so the Peoria Sub, Gilman Sub, Heyworth Spur. Date, marks, so this is a reporting mark, CN, IC, ADMX. Number, type, so this is the code generally. You could put boxcar, covered hopper. I have kind of my own shorthand. It's partially the AAR codes, which are like LO is covered hopper, XM is boxcar, right? But for certain ones, I'll be more specific. For covered hoppers, especially, if it's a 3-bay covered hopper, I'll put LO3. If it's a 4-bay covered hopper, I'll put LO4. If it's a pellet covered hopper, I'll put LO4P, stuff like that. Then the model, this is a particular car or engine model. So Trinity, High Cube, inner end volume, Pullman Standard 4750, et cetera, et cetera. This is not model centric. So which someone might want to do if they're not as familiar with the model offerings, and that put the model, if there one exists, the actual model and brand of the model that makes it in this column. But I don't do that. I have a separate spreadsheet that has a list of the cars that I'm looking for that there are models of that exist in my spreadsheet. Then color, this is kind of a generic thing to be able to filter things easily. And scheme, so whatever paint scheme it's called, generally I try to put if it's a particular railroad's paint scheme, I'll try to put that first, so that I can filter easily by that railroad. If I don't want to actually see the paint scheme, just that particular paint scheme, so I can just filter by that railroad if they have different reporting marks. And also, if I had to do it again, I might also put just kind of similar to my next column, which is graffiti, but I'd put I might suggest a condition column. So like if it's a fresh repaint, or if it's a rust bucket, or if it's a patch out of something, which I put patch outs in the scheme because it's still in that scheme, but it's patched. So I'll put scheme, comma, patched or whatever. Then FRA striped, this one's specific for me. The FRA mandated the yellow reflective stripes in 2005. And then you needed 20% of each owner of cars needed 20% of their cars to be striped by 2007. And then every year after that, they needed 10% more until they hit 100% in 2015, I think. 2014 or 15, because he skipped. No, it was 15. So in 2006, theoretically, was actually the year they were most feverishly applying stripes, because they had to meet that 20%, not just 10% in 2007, although they had 2 years to do it. So it's the same 10% a year. And I actually will have on the Gilman Sub in a future layout a rail car repair facility, which I plan to have applying those. What I plan to do is I'll put the stripes on one side of the car, deliver it with the stripes facing the backdrop, in between sessions, flip it, and then the stripes are facing out.
That's a pretty wild idea. I've thought about that too. When I mess up weathering, just flip it around and hide it on the other side.
Right. Yeah, there's always one good side, one bad side.
Yeah.
So that's the first block of columns that I fill in for every car. The next, or the remaining blocks, with exception of 2 of them, I generally don't fill out because I don't know. But when I do know, I fill it out. First, it's pool. So if it's in a particular pool, say this car is in an ADM pool, then I'll put that there. Load or empty, self-explanatory. Commodity, self-explanatory. Notes, catch-all for everything else, right? And then the 2 exceptions here are source and author. So if it's from something online, I'll put the link there, and the author, whoever posted it or took the picture. And then I have the routing info, which again is very, very rarely filled out, or filled out with guesses, in which case I put a question mark after it, obviously. But it's origin, and within origin you have origin railroad, origin industry, and origin station and state. Via, so where it was interchanged it onto or off of my relevant line, the Gilman Sub. Then the same thing for destination. Destination railroad, destination industry, destination station and state. And that is all 27 columns.
Do you ever foresee yourself stopping? Like, I mean, you talk about 3,000 entries. I mean, is this just too much fun for you to stop, or is there at a point where you think you've collected enough data?
I hope I don't stop. It will slow down because I've done I've covered everything or found everything there is to find to an extent. I would love to find a treasure trove of stuff. I mean, one day maybe I will. So yeah, it's slowed down, but I also enter a lot of, like I said, I have very few actual entries that are on the Gilman Sub, so a lot of it's adjacent, and I can get pretty far off adjacent. I have even stuff from Florida because CSX phosphate traffic is common in my area, but I don't have any. I know of that from generic pictures where you can just see CSX cars, tan CSX cars, right?
Yep.
But I don't know car types, schemes, anything like that. So I found a video from my era of a phosphate train leaving Florida on the CSX, and put that in the database. So I had the scheme and reporting mark proportion data.
Now, were you able to take that information from that train and actually authenticate it to it actually went through and you found pictures of it on or near your sub to say that train actually did go through and the likelihood of it being on the Gilman Sub was pretty likely?
No, not that particular train. I'm just assuming that they were in CSX's generic phosphate pool.
Okay.
And thus, it's a long enough train that is theoretically, just depending on who you ask, a safe or a not quite safe bet. The makeup of that train is representative of the overall pool of which would have been seen on the Gilman Sub, but not that particular train. No.
So some of these may not be an exact number match, but it's a fine representation,
right, of the traffic in the pool, not necessarily the car.
Gotcha. That certainly makes sense.
Which I would love to be able to do, but I just can't.
Right. Without enough information, maybe one day you get a photo that can back it up. Yeah.
And even if I do, like, I plan to model railroad for the rest of my life, so maybe I'll get to that point where everything else is done, and I'll do that. But even if that data came, I would use it where I could in buying new models, but I definitely wouldn't immediately like replace everything with accurate car numbers or renumber everything or anything like that. I'm content again with the macro top level authenticity.
Yeah, it's a good representation, which is providing a good simulation of what you're looking for and the likelihood that you would see it. It's not something oddball that would never make sense to be there. So therefore, it's an acceptable level. Is there something that you have going now that you really wish you could get more accurate?
My switch lists, for sure. Not having any switch lists to be able to formatting of my switch list, particularly not necessarily the car traffic or the makeup, although that too. I use JMRI Ops Pro currently, and it only goes so far. It doesn't allow you to apply those proportions. So I either try to trick it into doing it for me, or I just use it as best as I can until I find a better option, which I'm probably gonna have to make my own. The best option, if you're willing to, is just use a spreadsheet or something like Ops Buddy, which is a spreadsheet that Matt Forkham created. That's totally the best way to do it if you're willing to format it each time. I'm just super spoiled with how JMRI, you press build, you press print, done. And you press terminate, and now all the cars that you just spotted are now automatically accounted for where they're supposed to be and automatically pulled next time. I just haven't worked up the discipline to do that manually each time. I'm just too spoiled. But I guess that kind of got away from your question. The answer is is I don't have anything to reference to authentically format my switch lists. So I'm just kind of doing best I can, generic. I got the right font, I think, but in terms of what the headings are, what info was displayed, obviously you get car number, car mark, car type, but in what order it was, how it was displayed, all the headings, stuff like that, I'm still in the blind of, and I would love to just find one switch list. I don't care where it was from CN, because they use the same system, right? It could be from Northwestern Canada for all I care, as long as it's from the same era and thus using the same. They used a system called SRS, something scheduled railroading, something like that, as a system to track traffic and thus print out switch lists.
A conductor somewhere went home, emptied his pockets, he threw it in a pile somewhere, and it's sitting there just waiting for you to find it someday, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you do find it, because I know that that's kind of that, that information you just desire to see. And it is really neat. And I've gotten the opportunity to see some inside baseball stuff from the Providence and Worcester. And it really is neat when you can see what it really is and what it really looks like. And then, of course, be able to rebuild it and then apply it to your layout and build that level of authenticity. And it feels good as an operator, because you're learning something, right? When you guys come over and they're operating your layout and you hand them something that's authentic, or they're seeing something, it's like, this is really close to the way it was.
Yeah, it's just hard to explain. It'd just be so much cooler. It's still a switch list. It still tells you pull spot everything at whatever location, but the way it tells you that, I think being authentic would just be so cool.
Yeah. I'm more than confident you'll get there. You're persistent enough, sure. And you got plenty of time to figure it out too.
I'm sure. Yeah. In fact, I've actually supposed to be having a guy who found some from the Ontario, I think, area from 2001, but I think they were still using the same system. So we'll see. He had to find them and scan them.
Fingers crossed for you, my friend. I hope you find that information, and certainly enjoy listening to the deep dives that you take into the CNIC Heyworth Spur and obviously now the Gilman Sub, and setting an era, gathering, going for all of that information, building an awesome simulation of a railroad that you kind of missed out, but now you get to live it in HO scale. And it sounds like you've got a couple hobbies within the hobby of doing some kind of historical research. Is there a historical society wrapped around the IC? Have you ever touched base with that or worked with that at all?
Yes, I've been meaning to. There's an IC Historical Society. They were originally independent, and they went defunct for reasons I can't recall. And their collection is now owned under the protection of the Monticello Railway Museum in Monticello, Illinois. They used to put out a magazine too, which they're not doing anymore, but I think they might eventually revive. And then the Monticello Railway Museum is currently scanning all the back issues and posting them for free on their website. And it's fitting too, because Monticello has a bunch of IC engines and equipment, 2 of which were actually donated to them by CN. Actually, more than that, 3 or 4 of which were donated to them by CN.
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
Including the very first SD40 ever built.
Well, we'll get those links and we'll share them along with all the other information on this episode at aroundthelayout.com/137. We'll also share some photos that Isaac will provide of his work and everything else. So go there, aroundthelayout.com/137. Check that out. So Isaac, you and I, when we were talking about this episode, we put together a question of the month. And we asked listeners, what is the most prototypical thing about their layout? We got 6 great answers, and we're going to take a listen to those and see what folks had to say.
I know who one of them is already.
You know who one of them is. All right. So we'll see if we can figure out which one it is. We're going to actually start with Paul Stamp.
Hey, Ray, this is Paul Stamp, and I model the Finger Lakes Railway in HO scale. Most of what I model is in an effort to be prototypical. My rolling stock roster is filled with cars that I've actually seen out rail fanning the Finger Lakes. My op scheme replicates the same jobs FGLK runs on a weekly basis, and my track plan replicates the hub and spoke nature of the lines that the Finger Lakes owns. But the most prototypical thing about my layout is actually something that I haven't built just yet. Joey B. of Late Night Hobbies has produced a kit called Short Line Railroad Offices and Workshop, which is a prototypical replication of the actual offices that are at the Finger Lakes Yard in Geneva, New York. I'm so excited that Joey chose to create this kit, and I'm very much looking forward to assembling it in order to give my layout a feel of the actual prototype.
Well, that's pretty cool that he worked with Joey. Joey does a great job over at Late Night Hobbies and great supporter of the podcast. Very cool that he's able to provide these buildings to bring even more authenticity to the Finger Lakes, which is a really cool short line railroad out in central New York.
Oh, yeah. I didn't recognize the name Paul Stamp, but as soon as he started talking, I recognized his voice from his YouTube channel. I'm a big fan.
Very cool. All right, let's hear from Mike Osborne.
Hi, this is Mike Osborne. On my Santa Fe Pacific Railroad, the most prototype thing about my layout is everything gets weathered. Freight cars, engines, structures, track, Everything has weathering on it. Nothing's bright and colorful. Enjoy the podcast.
Well, thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. And yeah, weathering definitely brings a great feel to a layout, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think it's one of obviously I don't have everything weathered. I would love to be, and I kind of wish I'd done this from the start and only putting weathered stuff on the layout. And if it's not weathered, it doesn't go on the layout. But I'm too far gone for that. Maybe I can eventually. If I only run weathered cars and I get enough cars that I can run the layout, but not there yet. And that also kind of goes back to one of the things, I don't know, I'd call it a pet peeve, but consistency and authenticity or being a prototype modeler, and that if you're a rivet counter but you don't weather your cars, sure, you're free to do that. But I think you're a little inconsistent in that you're not being comprehensively authentic. Authentic.
Weathering happens, you get these things out here and it doesn't take them very long and they've got dirt and grime on them. I mean, think about when you buy a new car, how soon do you have to rewash your new car? And, these rail cars are going up and down through some dirty places and it doesnn't take long. So they don't stay clean for long unless you want to model that one day that they were all clean. I guess that would be the only way you could possibly sell it. But
and even still, the wheels and couplers are still rusty.
That's right. All right, let's take a listen. Michael Spore.
Oh, Ray, this is Michael Spore from Houston, Texas. The most prototypical aspect of my layout is the schedule. 100% of the trains in my operating sessions, freight and passenger, run in the exact schedule that the real trains did. During the operating sessions, I use a strict fast clock to keep all these trains at the accurate times they left from the stations for freight and passenger.
Well, I think Michael's also gotten that really, really beautiful data too, to be able to back that up when you can pull up and have logs and, that all that information to know when those passenger cars left stations, then you're able to replicate it. And all just goes back to being able to get that information in hand.
Yeah, for sure. It's a challenge. One I plan to conquer in the future.
Excellent. All right, let's listen to Dave out on Long Island.
Hey, Ray, it's Dave Barraza. I'm answering the question of the month. I would say that the most prototypical thing on my layout is the operations scheme. A couple of my operators work for the prototype that I model, and they've, with a smile, told me that I've successfully duplicated all the same problems that give them trouble in real life, which I took as a compliment. See you soon.
Yeah, I think that's the stamp of approval, right? When you get a former employee or employees to come to your layout and say, yep, that felt like a day at work.
Which I can't imagine doing. I can't imagine working on the railroad and also being a model railroader, but there's a bunch of them out there.
Yeah. I've covered that a couple times with folks that are, prototype railroaders. And, I've had jobs where I can't imagine coming home and doing that job as a hobby, but I guess when you love it and, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. Well, good for those guys. We're going to listen to Dan coming to us all the way from across the big pond.
Hi, I'm Dan Beresford. I am from Mansfield in England, and the most prototypical thing about my layout, because I do not have the space to do a large I'm going to have to freelance the track plan essentially because I don't have the space to do something prototypical. So the most prototypical thing about my layout is going to be the fleet and the rolling stock on the layout. I'll be modeling the Interstate Railroad in around 1952. So I'm going to be basically hunting down as many accurate steam locomotives for the fleet as I possibly can. And I am currently repainting, redecaling, and weathering a massive fleet of 55-ton hoppers and kit bashing a few Walthers C&O wood cabooses into interstate prototypes.
Well, I think you'd be one to agree that compression doesn't necessarily take away authenticity, does it?
Yeah, I was going to say, not to be disrespectful, but I pretty strongly disagree with the notion that you ever have that space requires freelancing, right? And even if you do compressing a prototype does not make you a freelancer. You're still trying to accurately represent the prototype within your space. And in the same I would say it doesn't even make you a proto freelancer. If you're still your main goal is to replicate a prototype. Compression is sure a necessary evil, but it doesn't, even compression or modifications of the track to fit it or to bend it to your space is not proto freelancing, because your main goal is technically it's proto freelancing. Sure. I would say the heart of it is not proto freelancing, because your main goal is still to be prototypical or to replicate a prototype.
Yeah, like what you said, necessary evil, because and not even really evil. It's just a necessity.
Right.
I mean, nobody I know has a building big enough to build any of the, even the shortest short
exactly.
line.
We all do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's.
I've compressed the Heyworth Spur, even though I've compressed it a very little compared to most. It's still compressed. It doesn't make it a freelance or even proto freelance, in my opinion.
Right.
On that same note, I think that there's two sides of proto freelancing. There's proto freelancing and there's proto freelancing, right? There's proto freelancing where I'm sure I'm making concessions that maybe deviate me a bit from strictly prototyping, but I'm still trying to model a prototype. Whereas there's proto freelancing in where I'm trying to create a fantasy railroad, a railroad of flies, but I'm trying to keep it authentic,
right?
Or plausible is the word I like to use.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sure, those are both proto-lancing. There's just such a huge gray area that calling everything proto-lancing is technically true, but not helpful.
Yeah, there's different levels of it for sure. There's from one extreme to the other. So, and I think this last one is the one you've been waiting for, Joe Atkinson.
I'm guessing, yep.
Hi, Ray. This is Joe Atkinson from Council Bluffs, Iowa. Responding to your question, what's the most prototypical thing about your layout? I kind of struggle with this one. It feels a little bit like asking me which child I love the most. The goal of the hobby for me is to recreate my days of chasing the Iowa Interstate's 4th subdivision in 2005. None of my modeling will ever hit the target exactly, but the pursuit of that goal is what makes prototype modeling the most fun for me. In my mind, the layout as a whole is really the model. It's like a 3D live action painting, with track and equipment and structures all being detail parts to be assembled in order for that larger model to look and operate like its prototype. In my world, I would say recreating the prototype's track schematic is really foundational for accurate operation, since I want to be able to model every move I saw when I was chasing them. But smooth locomotive handling, trouble-free operation, accurate car routing, and equipment choices and structures and scenery are all super important to the quality of that overall layout model. Thank you, Ray. I really enjoy the podcast. I hope everyone has a very peaceful and meaningful Christmas.
Well, thank you, Joe. Merry Christmas to you and your family, and appreciate you submitting that answer. And he hit on quite a few things that we had talked about, and certainly one being what we just talked about with compression. And again, I think it goes back to that storytelling concept, right? As so long as you have the good parts of the story and substitute the word story for operating area, right? So he has the area he wants to operate, whether it be a yard or he has the industry he wants. But the boring part is that piece of track between there and the next exciting spot, right? And if you can compress that a little bit, now I like the neutral space idea too, but if you're compressing that, you're taking the boring part of the story out, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good storyteller.
Exactly. Yeah. No surprise. I'm a big fan of Joe's, and I'm gonna out him. He admitted to me he had to take like 7 takes of that before he got a good one. He told me.
Well, that's all right.
Sorry,
we take a few takes when we record this as well. So Joe's did an excellent job. We appreciate that. And everybody who submitted their answer for the question of the month. And if you want to submit your answer to next month's question of the month, you'll go to aroundthelayout.com/question. Check out the question of the month there. Hit record, gives you all the instructions on what you need to do to submit your answer. You can do it right from your phone or any other device that you can connect to the internet that has a microphone. So leave us a message and tell us your question of the month. You may just hear yourself on Around the Layout podcast. Isaac, want to thank you so much for coming back again and sharing your passion for prototype railroading. And we've got so much more that we can talk about, and you've got a whole lot of stuff going on. And as you progress, we'll definitely keep up with you and get you back on the show and learn some more about prototype railroading. But until then, Thank you again for coming on. Merry Christmas to you and your family.
You too. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.